Will Steam be porting any games to consoles, or will it just stay on PC?
You will get a better idea of that by the end of this year.
So yeah, the Switch Pro didn't turn out to be real, but the Game Boy, that's real. Yeah, Valve entered the console market. The Steam Deck kinda caught the internet off guard, but it shouldn't have been that surprising, cause it leaked a while back. Now let's get a few misconceptions out of the way first. This isn't a streaming box. It has hardware inside it. It's not an Ouya or an Atari VCS or any of those other kind of consoles, but it isn't. Also, this isn't like the Steam box from a few years ago. You might remember those old Steam consoles, but they weren't really consoles. They were pre-built PCs that were made from separate manufacturers, not Valve, and they just had SteamOS installed. But why now? After all these years, why would Valve do this now when competition seems to exist already? Well, it's because over the past few years, PC gaming has grown immensely, both in supports and community size. When I first got into PCs a while ago, many ports from console games were hit or miss, if they came at all. Most games that came from console took very little advantage of the more powerful GPUs and CPUs that PCs had, and solid-state drives, and all the other fun features that weren't on the consoles. Consoles and PCs seemed to be two separate markets that appealed to two different kinds of people, and it just kinda was that way. It wasn't a place that was all that friendly to the average Joe. If you had no incentive to learn about the technology or make your game run, you'd encounter quite a few problems. Questions like, what is OpenGL, or how do I play DirectX 10? It gave off the stigma of being, well, messy, not as convenient as a game console. But now, it's a very different place. No longer do you have to mess with config files, no more driver issues. Consoles got a little bit more complicated, and PCs got simpler, and now they're about the same. You can just plug it in via HDMI, plug in a controller if you don't want to use a mouse and keyboard, and play games. Given the growth in the PC market, I guess a lot of other people have seen this as well. There is the problem of price. If you have the disposable income, a great gaming rig is gonna be better than a new console. Yes, my hot take here is a $3,000 computer will be better than your PS5. But if you're not willing to shell out that kind of money, what you might get is hit or miss. A lot of cheap pre-builts and laptops are just bad. They're really, really bad. They have odd specifications that don't really help games run better. By getting past that price point, by giving console users a PC for sub $500, I have to assume that Valve is counting on people to just say, hey, wow. The Steam Deck isn't the first handheld gaming PC, not by a long shot, but it is special. Because unlike these things, which are handheld PCs, this thing is a console that can be a PC. It has its own custom chip from AMD, which in my opinion is the only thing that differentiates this as a console and, all these as not consoles. It has Valve's own operating system and Valve's storefront. It checks all the same boxes that something like the PSP Go would, so yeah, it's a game console. The first 9th gen handheld. Spec-wise, it's not a powerhouse. Even with different architectures, this thing's graphical capabilities are likely going to be somewhere around the last gen systems, which is impressive for a handheld, but not so much for a, new console. Power draw is always going to be an issue for these kind of things, and, well, battery life probably ain't gonna be that hot. But it's much easier to scale a game down to lower graphics than scale memory usage and CPU, and this thing at least has, good versions of that. But this thing doesn't have to be concerned with competing with 30 plus teraflop PCs or even the 10 plus teraflop new consoles. It really just has to be concerned with being better than the Switch. yeah, this thing's still a handheld, and that's important to remember. I don't think they're going to take a huge chunk out of Nintendo's market share, because these are still different audiences. Even if you can play older Nintendo exclusives on this, and it will run and look better than on the Switch, that's not going to matter too much to those that just want to play Breath of the Wild 2. As for core PC users, those with fancy rigs, I'm not sure how much appeal this will have. I mean, I reserved one, because it's a new console. It's difficult for me to imagine this thing being a smash hit and selling 20 million units, but even if not, this is Valve's way of saying, hey, console users, PC gaming doesn't have to be so complicated. The main company that would be looking at this and maybe shaking in their boots a little bit is probably Microsoft. After all, this seems like it does everything xCloud currently does, but on native hardware, and without a third-party accessory, and without the monthly fee, and most importantly, without Ethernet connection via gigabit speeds. If there's a market for playing real games on the go, which it seems like the Switch showed there is, I imagine this would do a lot better than, well, streaming, at least until internet is much better. One question many have had is in regards to SteamOS and its support of games. Not every Steam game works with Linux. In fact, not a whole ton do. For me, initially, this was my biggest concern with this device, but luckily, Valve does seem to have addressed this. So this version of SteamOS that runs on the Steam Deck is actually different than the version that you can install on PCs right now, and especially different than those old Steam machines. The details aren't entirely clear, but we do know it does come with Valve's Proton, which is a branch of Wine. Effectively, this means that Windows games can run on this box without installing Windows, but you could install Windows if you want. Because of this, I think the Steam Deck actually just has the best library of any platform. The amount of titles that just aren't available on console is pretty astonishing, and even amazing indie titles don't go onto, the Xbox and the PS5, likely due to licensing fees and ESRB costs. Storage-wise, going the route of SD cards makes a great deal of sense, but with the top two models having NVMe drives, well, that's one category it could actually stand pretty close to other 9th gen consoles in. For me personally, this is just far more exciting than the PS5 and Xbox Series X because it's the first console I've seen in a while that offers more freedom to users rather than taking more away. It remains to be seen whether the larger console fanbase adopts this thing in mass, but initial reservations crashed Steam, so I expect it to at least sell pretty well. Also, wouldn't it be wacky if Half-Life 3 was SteamOS exclusive?